Thank you, brave souls, for staying. Those who did, who were here for the debate. Welcome. I'll be very brief because it is into the evening and we want to value your time. And also, we have such an amazing panel of people here tonight who are going to talk about this very important topic about what's at stake in 2020, how we're going to win. There's going to be a focus on the Jewish community, but of course, the scope of it beyond that. I think for the first time, that question of Judaism was brought up today on the debate stage. I don't remember the question being asked specifically pointedly to the candidates. We have two major party candidates who are Jewish. So it is something of interest to a lot of us. So I'm really excited to listen in. My name is Manny, and thank you for being here at my small business. I was just in a very, very sparkly dress right before this. This is much more comfortable. Manny's, for those of you who haven't been here before, it's a venue that hosts civic programming. We also have a political bookshop right out front, and we have a non-profit restaurant that hires formerly homeless and formerly incarcerated people and trains them in kitchen skills and then puts them into full-time employment. So it's a whole kind of mixture space. We have a countdown clock for the election right outside our doors. If you want to check that out, it's the only one in the country that's doing that. We have a very small team here at Manny's. The whole team is, less than 10 people. I don't know, something like that. And the two people over there in the back are the backbone of this space. And it really shows you how a small but mighty team can make big things happen. We've hosted 12 Democratic debate watch parties, bringing in thousands and thousands of people in our community to watch the debate. So with a very small team. So hats off to them. Thank you so much to the Rural Wallenberg Jewish Democratic Club. I'm so glad that it is resuscitated. The phoenix rises. And I don't know who I'm handing this microphone off to, but Gia. To Gia, who's come here with one gimp foot. Wow. Are you allowed to say gimp foot? Probably not. Here's the microphone. Thank you for coming.
Shortly, but first, just thank you so much, Manny. He is so generous with letting organizations use his space, those who maybe can afford to pay something, and those who often cannot. And it's just such an amazing resource. And I just want to make a plug. I am a supporter, sponsor. I'm a sponsor. And have been from early on. One of the first. And it warmed my heart when I saw $36. He did that intentionally. Double tie. Double tie is what gets you 2 times 18. Gets you the sponsorship. So I encourage everyone to join and come to as many programs as possible. So as Manny mentioned, I'll be short, but this event is sponsored by the Rural Wallenberg Jewish Democratic Club. It's an organization here in the city that has been around since the early 80s, the Jewish Democratic Club. And there was a bit of a hiatus the last few years. I myself was president over 15 years ago. And so a few of us have come back to say, okay, there's so much energy, so many Jews of all ages that are involved in politics, and people interested, maybe Jew-friendly, whatever. And we really need to have a presence. So for those of you who are not on our email list and came here tonight through Manny's or a friend or something else, please consider giving us your digits or your email, and we'd love to communicate with you. This is the first event of 2020, and we are intending to have quarterly programming. So probably in May we'll have another event, potentially on the issue of immigration and refugees and partnering with other organizations doing important work in the Jewish community and beyond on that issue. But as you all know, we are here to talk about this crazy and incredibly important election year. And we have a very distinguished panel of 3 professionals in the business joining us. And so I am going to invite them all to come up and get situated, and I'll do some introductions and we'll get started. I will first also point out Martin. I don't know if anyone has an issue with that, but hopefully not. Martin can also talk to you afterwards, any information on getting involved in the club. We are looking, I should say, for some new leadership, so anyone's interested in getting really involved, we would love to speak with you.
We would love to speak with you.
Yes. So we may or may not need the mics, but I'll keep it for now. Okay, so in no particular order, though starting with Ruth Bernstein, who is in the middle. Ruth is president and CEO of EMC Research, a national polling and opinion research firm. Ruth leads polling on a wide variety of political, policy, and marketing projects. She is especially proud of her work helping to elect women and people of color to elected office and securing voter approval for education, transportation, minimum wage increases, and environmental protection initiatives. I believe she's also an active member of Shar Sahab Synagogue, not far from here. And I imagine many other things I could tell you about her. But we will move on to Jared. Boygan, am I pronouncing that right? Okay, great. He is a founding partner of Terrace Barnes, Walters, and Boygan Heath, a campaign firm based in San Francisco that specializes in local ballot measures, primarily for tax and bond measures, as well as national and local direct mail for Democratic candidates and progressive organizations all over the place. Jared has led or worked on hundreds of political campaigns over the past 25 years. Prior to his career in politics, he was the regional director for the American Jewish Congress in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He and his wife, Kimberly, have one daughter at Diane Feinstein Elementary School here in the city and one at the Brandeis School of San Francisco. They have been members of both Temple Emmanuel and Congregation Shar Sahab. Welcome, Jared. I could probably talk about Sam even without looking at his bio, but I'm going to use my cheat sheet. So Sam Lauder is a public affairs professional with more than 30 years of experience in local, state, and national politics. He is a very proud fifth-generation San Franciscan and helped form the well-regarded boutique public affairs and campaign consulting firm of Barnes, Mosher, Whitehurst, Lauder, and Partners approximately 20 years ago, and he manages its public affairs and lobbying business. Sam began his professional career working for Congressman Philip Burton here in San Francisco, and then his successor, Congresswoman Sala Burton, for 3 years while he was still in college. He had enough time on his hands, I guess. He was going to work early in the political realm, and then he went on to work on the 1988 presidential campaign and Senate staff of Joe Biden, later working for California Lieutenant Governor Leo McCarthy. In his volunteer life, he's almost equally busy, probably even more sometimes. Sam is a key voice and political fundraiser in both the local and national Jewish community. He served as the past chair of the Northern California Board of Directors for the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, as well as on the National Council of AIPAC and on the boards of the Democratic Majority for Israel, Jewish Public Affairs Committee of California, the Jewish Bulletin, now known as J, and Brandeis School of San Francisco, among others. Sam and his wonderful wife, Stephanie, we have a few spouses here, are the proud parents of 2 college-age children, both at UC Davis. Welcome, Sam. Welcome, all 3 of you. So we're a small enough group that we can have some good discussion, but as you know, the theme is how do we win and what's at stake. So I wanted to have all of the 3 panelists begin by answering really the first question. How, we just came off of this crazy debate filled with vitriol and tension. Anyway, so maybe they all have some thoughts about what that does and doesn't mean and what we need to do. So, I guess I'm having Ruth go first.
All right. Well, first, we just left the room, but I want to thank Manny. So he's not here, so I won't. But I'll do that later. So I'm a pollster. So I guess take a poll. So how many of you in this room have watched more than one debate? How many of you read something about the presidential race like at least 3 times a week? So, just so you know, the people who are going to decide the election in November aren't like you, right? So the people who are going to decide the election in November are the people that aren't actually voting now. So about 2/3 of the country, in some places half to 2/3 of voters, of the registered voters vote in the primary election. The other people don't vote in the primary election, and many of them make a decision fairly late. They're not actually paying attention now. And what we just watched today in the debate of the arguing and the pointing, yelling over each other, that completely turns them off. And they don't like that or not very interested in that. So the challenge really is how do we get from our brains of thinking about this constantly now for the last year and watching all of those debates, how do we turn that into actually being able to communicate to those other voters? And I'm not going to make guesses about who's going to be the nominee and which nominee is going to make the most difference. But regardless of who the nominee is, what's going to make the difference, I think, is actually finding a way to connect with those voters and keep them from feeling disenfranchised. Work that we did after the 2018 election, 2018 election was a huge turnout election for an off-year election, and we did focus groups and we met with voters who had voted, 2 different groups, those who had voted in 2018 but were not normally midterm election voters, and then we met with people that skipped the 2018 election. They had voted in 2016 and skipped 2018. And what we saw is that those folks who skipped it came away from 2016 feeling disenfranchised, like their vote didn't matter. Like, I did all of this and this is what happens in the country. And so I cared and now it doesn't matter anymore. And so what we're gonna have to do is bring them back into the process and make them feel like it actually matters to them to vote. And those people who did vote, many of them said actually the reason they voted was because somebody came to their house, or somebody talked to them at the grocery store, or they said somebody came to my house and he told me, and then they came back again. And they made sure that I actually filled out my ballot, and they gave me information. And they said a lot of the things that keep them from voting is the confusion on everything else on the ballot. They said I can get there on president because I know what I'm supposed to do, but all the other confusion. And that's just in California where it really honestly doesn't matter. What's going to be important is actually connecting with those voters in other places and not having them feel like the only time we care about them is 5 minutes before the election. So I think that's going to be true for any candidate who's running. How do they actually connect with those voters and make them feel like this matters to them and that their vote actually matters and is important to them? So I'll pass it off to one of you.
So I'm going to just refine it a little bit more. I'm going to assume that everybody here is registered to vote, and if you're not registered to vote, I'm confused as to why you're here. But is anybody not registered in California? Somewhere else? All right, because I thought there might be some people from out of town. So where are you registered?
Hawaii.
Where?
Hawaii.
Hawaii? All right. So no one's vote here actually is going to matter. Because the places that matter, we all know this. There's nobody in this room that hasn't heard this over and over and over again. There are battleground states. And the reason you keep hearing it is because it's accurate. So I'm going to use Pennsylvania as an example of the point I just want to add on to everything you said, which is whoever the nominee is, they're going to have a challenge, given how the campaign has been run so far, of building a bridge to the part of the party that they are currently alienating. And Pennsylvania I'm using as an example because you have kind of two distinct groups, I'm generalizing, but two distinct groups in Pennsylvania. You have the union community, whose jobs are really all about fracking. And you have the environmentalist community, who wants fracking to go away. And that is a hard bridge to mend. Whoever the nominee is going to have, that's going to be the dance. Is figuring out how to get to a place where everybody who's angry at them right now, and there's someone angry at every single person running, they're going to have to figure out how to mend that. It could be because we're in the throes of it, and I'm just like glorifying elections past. But I personally don't remember an election with such vitriol as this one. And again, I might be just rose-colored glasses on past elections, but it's going to be tough for this year. I don't want to pretend that this is going to be easy by any stretch.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, Sam. I mean, I think, this being a Jewish Democratic Club, I know that all of you have heard that, we have two Jews and three opinions. So I'm definitely not of one mind on this race. And being among friends and family here, I'm going to just own that. But I think they're actually a little bit more optimistic than some. My wife who hangs her head every day, this guy's going to win again, this is a disaster. I think there's a route to victory for almost any one of the major nominees that are in front of us, but I think the routes are different in each way, and I think there's different possibilities. And I'll just lay out, I think there's a general sense among folks, observers, that there's sort of a moderate path to the presidency, and then there's kind of a movement path to the presidency. And I'll just talk a little bit about how I kind of see each of those happening. Now, the moderate path, you may know, and this is one that I'm pretty familiar with myself in my everyday work. I work with independents and moderate Republicans all the time on local ballot measures, tax measures, all over the state, other parts of the country, not in the Bay Area primarily, red and purple counties all over California. And so I work with a lot of moderate Republicans every day on ballot measures, on tax measures, on local things that matter to them, on value. And most of them do not like this president. Many of them actually do. They think he stands for them. They think he speaks for them. They think he represents a muscular representation of America that was lacking, and they appreciate that. And they think that he is kind of a no-nonsense guy who stands up for things that people were being pretty wishy-washy about in the past. And so there are actually a lot of people who really have good reasons. They're not my reasons, but reasons to them that make a lot of sense, and they're not necessarily shakeable. They don't hate this guy the way many of us hate this guy. And they don't see him as obviously needing to be changed. But there are people who really do have problems with him. They have problems with the way he behaves, the way he treats people. They think he's a little erratic for the leader of the free world, for the commander-in-chief. And they're looking for something that looks a little bit of a safer choice. That's obviously, the main goal for somebody like a Biden or a Buttigieg, or certainly an Amy Klobuchar. Kind of the prayer of that path is we're going to take back, particularly suburban women, people who are uncomfortable with him, just as we saw in the 2018 congressional elections. Those are, and in some of those swing states, those are important communities, and many of them have big Jewish populations. So Bucks County, Pennsylvania, for example, and some of the suburban areas around Detroit and Michigan. There's big Jewish populations there. Those are suburban counties. Those are states that went for Trump, where you think if you have a moderate who's palatable to those voters, maybe get them back. Not sure if that means the working class folks, but certainly suburban folks who are doing okay for themselves, but ended up either not voting or not voting passionately, or in some cases those counties went for Trump. Can we peel back enough of those votes? So that is one path to the nomination or to the presidency, and I think it's a very realistic path. I think you can absolutely see that almost any of those candidates with the right strategy, and if they execute the strategy well, and certainly any of them we can imagine are going to have plenty of money behind them because there's lots of Democrats all over the country that are going to put a lot of money into whoever the nominee is, or almost whoever the nominee is, and try and really help that person, that there's a path to do that. And the other path is the movement path. And this is the Bernie Sanders path. Warren's a little bit of an unusual kind of foot in both camps kind of a candidate in my mind, and I think you guys probably have some opinions about that we can talk about. But certainly the Sanders idea is this is a movement candidate. That we're in a situation, and I'll tell you a story that kind of, I think, encapsulates it for me a little bit. in my travels of working with all these moderate Republicans, a lot of times I'll ask them after I'll spend 6 months fighting against anti-tax craziness for these people who go and raise taxes in their own community, and I'll say, we'll have a chat, and these people will have stood up in front of their friends and neighbors and said, we have to raise taxes for this particular reason because this is really important, even though I'm a registered Republican, I've never voted for Democrat. And I'll ask them sometimes over a couple glasses of wine, we'll be at the end of the campaign, and I'll say, it was really a pleasure to work with you, this was fantastic, so glad we overcame all that, how did you become a Republican in the first place? We've been in these meetings all the time working for this. And I remember one person who answered this question for me, and she grew up, when she turned voting age, it was Jimmy Carter, and she said, I was embarrassed to be a Democrat. It was just embarrassing. You couldn't register as a Democrat. It was just embarrassing. And so she became a Republican. She's a lifelong Republican. She may change her registration now to independent because she's embarrassed by the current president. But I think it's interesting that one of the things that's happened over the last 20 years of Democratic establishment politics is we've really lost a sense of what it is to be Democrats. And if you're the movement candidate and you want to chart a path to winning, and not just winning, but even carrying down ticket races, perhaps, which is one of the criticisms against the movement candidate is, you got to define what it means to be a Democrat again. And again, being in the Jewish Democratic Club, it's kind of funny that we're in the year of Bernie Sanders because the last time that Jews didn't overwhelmingly vote the Democratic candidate was pretty much when Eugene Debs was on the ballot. That's an American socialist. So there is a history in the Jewish community particularly of fighting for workers in an extreme way, leading the rights and labor unions and leading those fights. And Bernie in a way represents a return to kind of those roots. And so there is a movement candidate possibility where the energy and the passion. And if you look at one of the things that carried Trump in 2016, I think we do as Bay Area liberals is important. I'm just going to generalize here. I hope I've offended any of you. But as Bay Area liberals, we have to kind of put ourselves in the shoes of people who supported Trump. What is it that he brought that caused people to vote for this guy? It's almost unimaginable to us. But Make America Great Again is a very powerful message. It's a message of nostalgia. It's a message of patriotism. It's a message about what has been lost. And Bernie is the only candidate who actually is offering that kind of emotion to his candidacy. Whether you like him or you hate him, you see that emotion behind it. And if you believe that what happened in 2016 wasn't just a total coincidence of him being a media star and Hillary being, having suffered 25 or 30 years of vilification by Fox News, being uniquely unpopular, and the Russians meddling, right? If you think it's just coincidence, that's one thing. But if you want to look at historical trends and think, gosh, America really is splitting and America's moving away from the establishment in the middle, then our Democrats have to articulate what we are again, who we are. What's the history of Franklin Delano Roosevelt? What's the history of labor unions? Who are we standing up for working people against people like the Koch brothers? You can't do that if you have a Bloomberg or a Steyer at the top of the ticket, but Bernie articulates that, and Bernie says it in a way that people respond to it, and they believe it. Whether you like him or you hate him, he gets that out of people. He gets that out of his crowd. So that is, I think, also another route to the presidency. It's a very unusual route. I don't know how it would look on an electoral map, to be honest. I haven't broken it down. But I see those two possibilities. I see them both as possible. So I wouldn't give up hope just yet.
So I'm sure there's a lot of questions about what we just said, and we'll make time for that. But I want to get to the sort of second part of the title of tonight. But this time I'm going to ask two questions, and each of you can answer whichever one you would like. The only caveat is that at least one of you has to answer each question. So whoever goes last, you might have to switch and answer the other question if the first two people answer the same question. Anyway, you get my point. Okay. And I'm just going to be a little stricter, maybe 2 to 3 minutes maximum. No, it's okay. So first question is, so support among the Jewish community is split among all the different candidates right now for the most part. But Bernie Sanders, Senator Sanders, is looking more and more like, he's the front runner now and like the nominee. Not that he is. I don't want to say that, but let's just say, if he is the nominee, what does that mean, or what could that mean for the American Jewish community? That's the first question. Second question is, what does 4 more years of Donald Trump mean for the American Jewish community?
I could have fun with both of these.
Yeah.
And go a lot longer than 2 minutes. I'll just take the first one. So there's this kind of knee-jerk belief that there's a monolithic vote in the Jewish community, which couldn't be further from the truth. Now, there's no question, I believe that the data continues to be the same with about 75%, maybe the low 70s, of the Jewish communities registered Democrat and votes Democrat. But within that, you have so many different categories of folks. You have the Jews who vote only on Israel. You have the Jews who vote with Israel being important, but it's one of the issues. You have Jews who don't even think about it. And you have Jews who actually are going to go for a position that's as far away from being pro-Israel as possible. You have an anti-Israel community. So you're going to have a wide variety of votes. And what that means with Bernie is I think what we are seeing is him trying to walk a line where he verbalizes that he is pro-Israel. He has spent time in Israel, there's no question. I think he yearns for a 1963 kibbutz socialist style of Israel that doesn't exist anymore. But there's no question in my mind he believes that the state of Israel should exist. But I don't think that's going to work. His method has been working for with the Jewish community. I think it'll work here. But there'll be some communities who just can't be for him. And I think that's what we're going to see is a drop off from that 70s percent. It'll still be a majority of Jews. I would be shocked. There's actually a columnist for the New York Post who says unequivocally, if it's Bernie Sanders, the Jewish community will overwhelmingly vote for Trump. It's not going to happen. There's too many issues that are important to all of us. I mean, people ask me all the time, if I'm a one-issue voter, I explain I'm a one-issue activist, I'm a multi-issue voter. And I don't believe that there's anything that could be done short of my children being kidnapped that would make me consider voting for Trump, and I might not then. But that's, I think, what we're going to see. The impact of the Jewish community is there's going to be communities within the registered Democrats that are going to be facing this dilemma of Bernie. Another interesting piece that we're seeing, though, it's not, there's a long way to go. Sanders is not the nominee yet. But we're seeing a fascinating play here. I'm sorry, Jay, if I go over a little bit more. We're seeing a fascinating play between the two kind of stereotyped Jewish American experiences between the two Jewish candidates running for a nomination. We're seeing Bloomberg, whose grandparents were immigrants, he grew up lower middle class, didn't really have much, and worked hard and made a lot of money. It's kind of an understatement, but very successful and believes in that American model and successful Jewish growing forward model. And then we have the Bernie Sanders model, whose parents were immigrants, who grew up in also in a working class environment, but some of those kind of Bolshevik roots, where it is the cause, the movement, as Ray was saying, that is the important piece. And we can go into much more detail of it, but she is going to throw things at me. So it's just a fascinating contrast to me to watch these two kind of stereotyped American Jewish experiences clash when we've really never had any Jews that haven't made it this far in the process anyway. They don't come this close. So it's just something that I've observed and I wanted to mention because I find it so fascinating.
So I'll take the second question about what's at stake. Former years of the Trump presidency. And I would say, honestly, I think we're at a crossroads for the role of civil law. And it horrifies me to say it because as grown up Jewish, one of the things that really frustrated me about my Jewish education was how much backward looking the Holocaust always was. And I always thought that is not my experience of America. I don't think it's healthy to grow up being afraid of your neighbors all the time. I think Israelis would say that. They don't like to be afraid of their neighbors, even though their neighbors are certainly violent towards them from time to time. But that's not how Israelis carry themselves. And I didn't like that about the Jewish identity growing up, and I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's healthy for my kids. I don't like it, people trying to introduce that as part of a Jewish identity thing. But I think for any minority group in this country, and to my mind, my personal view, the beauty of the American experiment, the absolute all-encompassing beauty, because it is a very flawed place with a very flawed constitution and some very flawed politicians and a history of very flawed presidents and terrible members of Congress and all those things, terrible leaders. But the beauty of the American experiment is you have never, in the history of the world, seen this type of polyglot experience last as civil society for as long as it has lasted. And you can miss it if you look at other parts of the country, but if you visit diverse parts of the country, like the Bay Area or like Los Angeles or some of these places, it's striking to you how anybody can be American. And that is part of what makes America America, is that you can come from anywhere, you can follow the rules and become anything. That's not a Democrat or Republican thing, that's an American thing. That's a very powerful dream, and that's a very powerful symbol. And I think the problem that this president, the threat of this president, is with his very attractive Make America Great Again, he is appealing against that completely. And he is systematically dismantling protections. And he is taking protections away from folks who need it, and he is putting teeth into the wrong parts of the executive branch that threaten it. He has turned the Attorney General's office into his own personal bulldog. He's using executive powers like the pardon for his own personal agendas. So I think the rule of law is what's at stake, and for Jews and every minority in the United States, I really worry about what our country will look like at the end of 4 years.
Well, those were two good in-depth answers. So I'm gonna, because they both took a lot of time, I'm gonna just go very short, and it's sort of a combination of the two questions, because I think what's at stake actually during this process over the next 9 months, or the year really of the election, if Bernie Sanders is the nominee and then if Trump wins, is the issue of anti-Semitism, which we all have to be really concerned about. And I think that I hadn't really thought about for a long time until now that Bernie Sanders might actually be the nominee, of what that might mean for anti-Semitism. And we know that if Trump stays president, as Jared said, it's not just about Jews, it's about the whole entire, everything awful that he does. But anti-Semitism is on the rise. And what does that mean actually if we have a Jewish person as the nominee? And will that be good for Jews, and that it will come out that, being a secular Jew is a perfectly normal thing, that there's nothing wrong with it, and that he, this is what Jewish looks like. Jewish looks like all of us in the room, or some of us in the room, and you can be very religious or not religious, and that's perfectly okay, and that Sanders maybe, will he talk about it more? He didn't talk about it 4 years ago. He's only recently started talking about his Judaism. He's uncomfortable. He continues to say he's uncomfortable talking about his personal life. So how is he going to talk about that, and what is that going to mean for the rest of Jewish Americans? And then what will that actually do? What will happen to people who, we know there are people who are incredibly anti-Semitic in this country, and what will that mean if we have a Jewish nominee? And what will that mean actually, what will that say if Trump beats him? And what does that do to all of us, and what do we have to be worried about? And I don't live in fear, but these things start to worry us. So that's my very positive notes.
Okay, well, thank you all. All right, great. So we are going to open it up, and I will just say that hopefully you'll have a question and you'll ask a question. If you do have a comment that you really want to make, that's okay, and you can. But in both cases, just be brief, be concise, because then we can get more and more people. Okay, gentlemen in the back.
So it was mentioned that there are 2 Jewish candidates in the race. Depending on your definition of Jewish, Tom Steyer is a third. He's paternally descended, although he grew up Episcopalian.
Actually,
What's the
Marianne
electability?
Williamson
Marianne
is also
Williamson was.
Jewish.
Well, my
She identifies, Steyer doesn't identify, that's why I named it.
Okay. I mean, the other candidates dropped out, but I was going to ask about Tom Steyer's electability. Is he going to stay in the race, at least until the nominee is picked?
I mean, I don't think Tom Steyer, whether Tom Steyer stays in or not, I don't think he's going to be the nominee.
I think he dropped out. Tuesday.
Yeah, well, the way Hitler identified Jews was they are Jewish. So we have to consider.
But I don't think Steyer's going to be the nominee, so
Yeah.
I guess
I agree.
I have a tendency to identify how people want to be identified, so that's.
There we go. Okay.
You talked about, we hear so much about lane in a different context, the kind of the movement way and the moderate way. And do you have any, further sense just from the rest of you as to what you would need to do in each of those lanes to win? Because as you said, we probably don't have a lot of control over which one of those lanes is actually going to get to be the nominee. So, but we may be able to help whoever that nominee is in whatever way they're going to get there. Any particular thought?
Well, I'll start, but you guys may have some additional thoughts here. I mean, I think, look, if you have the movement candidate, then it's, I think, really important to own the parts of the movement that most positively identify for those parts of the country that we talked about earlier, that where the election is going to be decided, those swing states. So if you have a movement candidate, that movement candidate is going to be about politics of the working class. And then it becomes about all of us pushing for those winning politics of the working class and avoiding some of those issues that Sam talked about earlier that can be divisive, like fracking and environment and climate change. And my 12-year-old, if she would hear, she'd be screaming at me right now, climate change is everything, that's the only thing that matters. How can you care about anything else? But, she's 12. So I think those of us that are, dealing with this right now, I mean, I think that if that becomes the movement, then we got to find the pieces of that movement that win and that work and that can withstand, $500 million of ugly opposition, attack, and spending. And we got to own them and we got to push for them. And if it's a moderate candidate, then I think that is going to feel a little bit more obvious. It's going to be similar to the way candidates have run in the past, but then it becomes about a very sort of more establishment politics of things people were used to before 2016.
I mean, can the moderates excite, I guess, the people?
Yeah.
Like, is there a way to do that?
I mean, when Obama was essentially a movement candidate, right? So we didn't. When we were, for many people, when we were out supporting Obama, and they were supporting Obama, it was not about a particular issue. Or when we were not single issue voters, it was about a movement in many ways. And so I think to that, that it is very different. I think in a moderate, and I don't think there's anything individually right now we can do to stop whatever wave is going to happen. And Super Tuesday is going to be massive, and there will be a big clue what's going to happen. But if it's a moderate candidate, it is a very, very different campaign. It may be that those occasional voters don't turn out. They don't get moved, and the people we're talking to are more of the traditional frequent voters. We're talking to them about issues, we're connecting with them, and making sure that they kind of come home to the party or the Democratic, they vote to their economic interest mainly. I think with a moderate candidate, it has to be a much more, an economic message, and less about, just turnout. And with a movement candidate, it's less about individual issues and really just energizing and motivating people.
So in our business, we have something called ballot drop-off. Probably all of you have heard about it, but some people come out, they vote for president, if there's a senator or governor's race, they go there, and as they drop down the ballot, you start losing them. In San Francisco, you start losing them at ballot measure RR. And so where I'm curious is in Michigan 4 years ago, Clinton lost by about 10,000 votes. 90,000 people cast a ballot without marking anybody for president. So who are those 90,000? Did they just really not like either person running, or were they waiting for a movement? Well, there was a movement. Trump was also a movement candidate. We have to remember that. I think Trump figured out that his brilliance is that he figured out that the Civil War never ended. He just kind of slept for a little while, and so that's where I'm curious: is who are those Michigan voters who bothered to vote but didn't cast a vote at the most important thing on the ballot? So if those are moderates who are looking for someone they believed in, then that's where the moderate goes. But if they're a movement, that's where we're going to find.
Yes, I do. You know, regardless of movement or not, I mean, I would be proud to have a Jewish president. But what I'm feeling, what I'm picking up in the energy of the center of the country is that someone like Bernie would turn people off from the rural country because they're going to feel like he's going to give away the country, this, that, and the other. And I think maybe to be safe, somebody like Elizabeth Warren would be a more safe bet. She wants to take him as a vice president or something else, but I'm kind of afraid for that type of dynamic because Trump is horrible.
I have more than one, but I'll just add the one that just came up. The first question I have is, how do you define a moderate Republican? Everyone hear that? How do you define a moderate Republican? How do they define themselves?
Look, I think that, I think there's lots of them actually, and they will be people who, honestly, Michael Bloomberg was probably a moderate Republican most of his life. Maybe he still is, something like this. But people who they believe in free enterprise above government. They're a little more skeptical of what government ought to do, but they're not completely anti-government and completely tax and things it takes to support a free society. But they're more skeptical, and they believe generally in personal freedom a little bit above what they would consider to be sort of a welfare state or a government state. But they also, if you talk to them, they would find themselves to be charitable people, generous donors, givers to their church, to poor people in their communities. They would certainly not consider themselves to be racist, and they're very happy to embrace people of color in their world, not going to other worlds necessarily, but if somebody moves into the suburb that they live in, that's going to be fine with them, and in fact, they're probably happy about that. So I think there's a fair amount of that, and I do run into it frequently. Now, I don't know about as a percentage of all. The Republican Party registration, certainly in California, is declining because most people who consider themselves to be moderate Republicans are now independents. They are leaving the party because they don't feel comfortable with what the Trump brand of Republicanism is. But there are many people who have been Republicans since Reagan who are not necessarily total reactionaries. And I think what's happened is that for many years that party has been sort of slowly hijacked by a combination of super, super rich dark money interests and media propaganda. And it's moved, and starting really thanks to Newt Gingrich primarily, kind of moved totally in that direction.
Trump and his campaign routinely espouse how proud they are. They've got Stephen Miller and Mnuchin and of course the great Jared Kushner and my Jewish grandchildren, and of course the Republican Jews and the evangelical Christians, their support for Israel, and look how good we are for the Jews. How does that play into this concern, Ruth, of anti-Semitism? I mean, they're saying it's just the opposite. That they're because of who they are and their strength as Republican Jews and evangelicals, they're good for the Jews.
Say your name. Listen, I think the Trump administration has played both sides on a great many issues. He's the best president ever for women. He says that constantly. The actions, and listen, you heard in my bio, I'm deeply engaged in quite a few pro-Israel organizations, including Bruce with the Water Bridge. And this administration has done things that, if I could step out of my distaste for them, that can be viewed as pro-Israel. Whether you agree with the strategy of what they've done or not, they're doing things that they believe is on Israel's behalf. So they are going to make that argument. But they're also defining the people who marched in Charlottesville as very fine people on both sides. I mean, there's a constant play, there's constant wolf whistles on the other side that makes the David Dukes of the world absolutely ecstatic. That makes the murderers in Pittsburgh and Bowie feel like this is their time to get away with it. So we're going to see both. My personal opinion is Trump is that he's neither an anti-Semite nor likes Jews. I think he only cares about Donald Trump. He might care about Ivanka, and then that's what we're done. And so he's just going to play whatever game. This guy is brilliant on so many levels. He's a master of just playing the media and just playing every issue that we can bring up. So we're going to see them talk about how this is the best administration ever for the Jewish community, and that we're going to hear again how Jews are disloyal if you vote Democrat and not for Republicans because of everything this administration has done. And people are going to have to take a deep breath and look in the mirror and decide whether or not they believe it. I don't think there's anyone in this room who does. There's no one on this panel who does. But it's going to be something we're going to have to deal with. The interesting thing about Bernie is that while Bernie would approach the issue of the U.S.-Israel relationship different than anybody prior to him, and he has surrounded himself. He has people in his inner circle who are, without question, anti-Israel. Okay, I know you do say, but I don't. Okay, so I'll just. There are people in his inner circle who say they don't want Israel to exist. So in my mind, that's anti-Israel. Now, if you're for one state, that is in my mind anti-Israel. So that is how I'm defining it. But it's going to be interesting. How can they accuse people of being, not good to the Jews if they want to vote for a Jew? So it's going to toss that whole question up in the world and we're going to have the opportunity to see.
So my question will build on the previous question and your answer. What's good for the Jews? We have two offers. Vote for me because I'm pro-Israel and I will do anything to defend Israel. And we have this offer from both the Republican and Democratic field. And we have another offer. Be with me because I am for human rights. I am for the things that are right. And they will protect you as well. And I will judge Israel based on what's right. What is the international law based right? What is the human rights based right? What is the humanity right? And my question to you and to everybody here is, what's good for us? What worked for us over the years? When we have democracy and human rights protection, or when we have an offer from Ivanka to protect us, we gained something, but didn't we lose a lot?
Well, I think
This is our
what
dilemma.
Sam said earlier is right. When you look at the American Jews, there's a fraction, there's a certain percentage that are going to vote based on what's best for Israel. Some are sort of soft play Israel, some don't care at all, and some are completely the opposite. And I think that's where, I think one of the benefits maybe is to talk about the diversity, that we have the opportunity to talk about the diversity of the Jewish community, and that you can be Jewish and not necessarily have to put yourself in a particular box, and that and for many people caring about human rights in this country or more human rights is more important for them than Israel, and that's okay, and that I think we can talk about the diversity of the Jewish population, and we all have to come up with what's the most important thing to us.
So Purim is coming up. The story of Purim is of a sovereign who had an advisor that was hostile to the Jews. sovereign had an eye for Jewish women. Mary was. And so, by virtue of her having the sovereign's ear, change the policy. That's the sort of insecure way to do it, by my thinking, is to just kind of get lucky with the sovereign's change of mind. And I think, as I said earlier, the rule of civil law is what protects Jews. And the same thing that's supposed to protect everybody is what we count on for protection. And the breakdown of civil law is dangerous for us. And so if you want to ask me what's right for Jews, it is protecting institutions of civil law. That means sometimes they make decisions we don't agree with or we don't like or whatever, but you gotta protect the institutions because ultimately the institutions protect everybody. And if those institutions break down, we better hope the next sovereign has another eye for Jewish women.
I think it's safe to say that that sovereign actually has a lot of different. So listen, the history, the world's history, this Earth's history has shown that Jared's answer is correct for what's good for the Jews. But in the last 70 years, we've had a nation state, Israel, that there's a lot of people in our community now that say, now this is what's good for the Jews. So it's going to have to be the individual question. I am more concerned for the United States of America if Donald Trump is president for 4 more years than I am for Israel if Bernie Sanders is president for 4 years. Because there's always hunters. And I don't think Bernie's going to be a friend. That's just how I read it. But he's not going to be so not a friend that Israel's not going to be able to be healthy and strong. And remember, they're in the middle of an MOU that they negotiated with President Obama. Not in the middle yet, there's still many years to go. That's going to last longer than this next 4 years.
Say what it is, Sam.
Oh, the MOU is a memorandum of understanding between the United States and Israel for over the 10-year life of it, $38 billion in military aid, most of which comes back, is spent in the United States. It started off at 75% of it spent in the United States, and we'll end up with close to 100% of it spent in the United States. And I'm not sure what the number is now. I think it's somewhere in the 80s. And that was negotiated by the prior president. So I am personally more comfortable with Israel being okay than the United States being okay, depending on who knows.
I'm interested in what you guys think about a potential convention fight, and especially if Bernie.
It'll be fun.
Good. Yeah, especially if Bernie, has close to a majority but doesn't, and and I think just an interesting part to me as a side comment is that he right now is the front runner for the Democratic nomination, and speaking of self-identification, doesn't identify as a Democrat.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm not my area of specific expertise, but, I've worked in politics for 30 years, so we can talk about all kinds of things that are, that we know nothing about. No, I think that, I think it's going to become, two possible scenarios. Bernie becomes pretty clearly has the most delegates, but doesn't have enough delegates without the superdelegates, and goes into the convention basically being almost the presumptive, but would need the superdelegates. And I think at that point, the party leadership and the superdelegate, which is the superdelegates, have to vote for him. I don't see a scenario where they would divide the party so drastically that he has the vast majority of the delegates and the superdelegates don't support him, even though right now many of them are concerned about it. But I think that's the more likely scenario right now, is that that's what happens. He gets in he doesn't have all the delegates, the superdelegates, they vote for him, and he's the nominee. The other possibility is that a candidate coming out of Super Tuesday gets enough candidates drop out, and there's still more to go, and we wind up with a head-to-head competition. But it has to get down to 2 candidates, I think, for the rest of the, and then it becomes. But I think eventually, then what happens now is what happened in 2016. It goes out to eventually get to 2 candidates, and we won't go for a convention, which is. Yeah. No, I think eventually those 2 candidates will. What happened with Clinton and Sanders in 2016? Eventually, one of them was ahead.
I think it would be a catastrophe.
Yeah.
I think it would be a catastrophe. There's no chance we beat this president if we have a fractured convention nominating process. We just won't. And whether or not that's my guy who's in the lead, as we go in there, we're gonna have to just get in line and get white smoke up the chimney. Because we gotta unite behind whoever it is. You know, my mom was the most fervent Hillary person ever. Could not say a nice thing about any Bernie person or supporter 2.5 years after that last election. She's like, if I have to do it, I'll do it. Because we gotta beat this president. I do think one thing I hear from Bernie folks, in light of your other comment about he's not even, acknowledged as Democrat, Bernie folks would argue that the party has left the people. And that if you look back at what's happened over the last, X number of years of nominees, that we have watered down what fighting for the working people is all about. That's what Democrats are supposed to be. And the establishment Democrats cozying up to Wall Street, taking big contributions, moving away from unions, that they no longer stand for what Democrats used to be. And so they would argue that Democrats have moved away from what the party is, and that Bernie's bringing it back to the roots. And so I think even though it's true technically that he doesn't identify as a Democrat, I think his people would argue that he's bringing it back to what it was supposed to be all along, away from sort of corporate interests that have taken it off track. And so I can't think of a bigger catastrophe for us in the interim.
I just want to get back to what I raised in the beginning. I mean, I love Bernie, and I think his heart is in the right place, and his principles are right. But I just think the fracturedness of our country, someone like Bernie against Trump, we may not win. And would it be better to have another candidate beside him?
So I'm going to use it as a little bit of a segue, and then we'll come back to questions. We did reach out to all of the presidential campaigns to try to invite a local representative to come to the earlier part of the evening, the debate. And so I want to give a shout out to representative from Elizabeth Warren's campaign. You want to say maybe talk about how they get involved or say anything?
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
So my name is Anthony with Elizabeth Warren's campaign. If you'd like to get involved, we're having volunteer activities to get out the vote for Elizabeth this weekend. I'd be more than happy to share my contact information and get yours as well so we can sign you up to help us get out the vote. Thank you so much.
And then I was asked to read a letter from a Wallenberg board member who happens to be the national pollster for the Bernie Sanders campaign. And he was invited to be on our panel, and he agreed a long time ago. Well, he said he would love to, but I don't know what state he's in now. But Ben Tulshin is his name, and so he sent me an email and asked if I would read the following. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. This is not any sort of endorsement, but this is someone who's working for Bernie Sanders. And he says, "Hello, Wallenberg Club. As a former board member, I'm sorry I can't be there, but I did want you to share this note from the front lines of the campaign. As we head into Super Tuesday with Bernie Sanders as the front runner and most likely candidate to win the Democratic nomination and face off versus Trump, I wanted to make the case for why he's a candidate worth our community's support. Number one, Bernie leads Trump in every national poll and polls better versus Trump than any other Democratic candidate due to Bernie's strength with younger voters, Latinos, independents, and white working class voters. He has real strength in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, 3 states that could flip the White House in our favor. 2, Bernie would be the first Jewish president, and his progressive values are rooted in his Judaism. His father immigrated from Poland to escape anti-Semitism and to pursue a better life for his family. He had family killed in the Holocaust. He lived on a kibbutz in Israel, and his political beliefs and values are clearly derived from his Judaism. Tikkun olam and standing up for the downtrodden are part of his core. He supports a two-state solution for Israel and has made supportive comments. He's saying J Street has made supportive comments regarding Bernie and his position on Israel. Thank you for your time. I'm glad to see the club getting back into action. So there you go. Any comments or questions on that? We can do that. I also want to do one other shout out to Vlad. I see you there in the back. Who's involved in the reinvigoration of Wallenberg, and Vlad works for the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. So I want to encourage you to share any thoughts you might have on the question or the comment that was made of what it would mean to have a Jewish president and whether that would be good or bring out more anti-Semitism. I just thought of you, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can well expect that it's going to get quite ugly. I do think you're going to see, and you're starting to see some of this already. The kind of two different streams of anti-Semitism coming out. One directed at Bernie and one directed at Bloomberg, right? You're seeing the kind of Judeo-Bolshevik kind of anti-Semitism being aimed at Bernie Sanders, and of course the Bloomberg as the kind of billionaire puppeteer being portrayed in that way on the other side. I mean, I think, when you think about reasons that, we haven't had a Jewish president up until this point, we recently did some, updated our research on anti-Jewish, the prevalence of anti-Jewish ideas in the United States. And what we found was that about a quarter of the population in the United States, that is a quarter of the electorate, believes that Jews are more loyal to Israel than they are to the United States. A quarter of the population. So you can well imagine how, if those ideas are that prevalent, they're definitely going to come out right in the course of this campaign. So I'll just leave it there. But I do have a question on that for the panel, though, if you would mind answering it, which is that Bernie isn't really that popular with the Jewish community. I think polls suggest he has like 10 to 11% of the Jewish vote at this point. So we might find ourselves in a position where, in a strange position where beating Trump might mean having to sell the Jewish candidate to the Jewish community. How would you do that? And how would you overcome some of the, I think, in some ways, legitimate concerns people have about some of the people in Bernie's orbit, whether he put them there or they arrived by some other means? Thank you.
Before we go there, Vlad, can we just, I want to make sure that your question earlier was answered. Listen, that's what everybody's going to have to search in their head and heart is who they believe in and who they believe can win. Might be the same thing, and it may not. And that's so there's no way of answering that question with anyone giving you some factual guidance. It's going to be, as Jared explained, is it a movement or is it a moderate candidate? So I just agree with your heart. Silent.
Stealing it. I mean, they stole it from him last time. Like the Democrats won't allow someone on 32.
So I can dispute that, but that's not what we're here tonight to do. Well, I'm not going to dispute the stealing. There's a system that's in place, and everybody knew the rules. So Vlad, so the poll you're citing, Ruth could probably talk more about this if you've seen it, but it's old. It was before Iowa. It was before. I am sure those numbers have changed, although Bernie probably still is below some of the other candidates, but I don't believe it's 11% anymore. But to answer it directly, how I would sell the Jewish community, if I was one to sell them to Bernie, is to go into the values that the Jewish community writ whole has long had. And Bernie speaks to those, fighting for people who don't have anybody to fight for them. that is why he's got a movement behind him. And most of what he talks about resonates with many of the pieces that you often hear people in Jewish communities say, these are one of the things that are important to me. And I think that's where you're going to have to focus in on, because Jews who aren't secular, you can't sell them on the religious aspect because it's not. Jews who care about Israel in one way aren't going to like the way he cares about Israel, so that's not going to work. So it's going to have to be on places where there's common ground.
Yeah, and I think that, like many other Democrats, Bernie is not their first choice. So I think many Jews that Bernie Sanders is not their first choice doesn't mean that they won't sort of come home to behind the Democrat. And I think the one, Bernie Sanders is not going to be a movement candidate the way Barack Obama was as big. Barack Obama was the first African American to be elected, and that was why a lot of people really felt like that was important. Bernie Sanders is not going to be, the movement is not going to be the first Jewish president. I think even probably for Jews. And I don't think we're going to, maybe a certain small population, but those Jews were probably going to vote for the Democrat anyway, right? So I don't think we're going to sell them. It's not going to be like the first Jewish president. That might be exciting as a secondary, but it's going to be beating John as the primary.
Time for a couple of questions.
What if Bernie reached out to, and he called out, what if the Jewish community reached out to Bernie and made him listen to them? The way that all the other coalitions have, and the way he calls out Latinos. Bernie's not Latino, but he calls them out on stage every day.
Well, somebody's done something because just recently he started talking about being Jewish.
I saw that.
So, he didn't do that 4 years ago. And it's only been in the last few weeks when it looked like he might actually be the nominee that he started talking about being Jewish. So someone's done something, right? And there's no such thing probably as a Jewish community.
The way that he has with the other minorities that he's not.
And of course, I think, it sounds right. Like 80% of the Jewish community is probably going to vote for it.
But that other 20%, where is it?
They're going to vote for it.
Well, listen, there is a significant, very passionate, loud part of our community that votes Republican, adamantly votes Republican. So those folks are happy with Trump, and he's great, and so let's, and I think it's probably more like 25% not just 20%. So forget about those people. So it's 75% of the Jewish community, roughly. That's gonna, there's the variety in that vote, which I brought up earlier. That's where it's going to be. So some of them are automatically. Bernie's their guy for a variety of reasons. Some of them, the Democrat, it doesn't matter who it is. It's going to be the Democrat for them. There'll be people. I mentioned it earlier, and I hope it didn't sound flippant. I'm actually worried about. I believe with any of the other nominees that Florida is up for grabs. I don't believe with Bernie it is, because he's lost the Cuban vote. And he, I think, has lost the Jewish vote there. And the Jewish vote isn't big in a lot of places, but Florida actually is.
Knowing that now, isn't there so much we can do about it?
I think there's a significant part of the Jewish community in Florida, from statistics I've seen, that are one-issue voters, and it's Israel. And they don't, I don't know if the opinion that I shared earlier, which is I'm more concerned about this country under 4 more years of Trump than I am about Israel under Sanders. I think Israel's got Congress on its side and is going to be fine. And I think Sanders is actually pro-Israel. I personally don't agree with his approach to it, but I do believe it fits the intent of pro-Israel. But I don't, from statistics I've seen, conversations I've had, I don't think that the Florida Jewish community gets one significant portion of it.
Well, and to add to that, the Democrats can win the presidency without Florida.
Yeah.
Florida is incredibly difficult to win for Democrats. And so it's a very, very deep purple. I have never seen, I've seen a lot of polling in Florida, and you could not believe how many issues are literally 50-50. Like, it's everything. It's like 49-49, 49-49. And so, maybe in some ways, campaigning in Florida is also incredibly expensive. And so, but if we don't have to do Florida, fine, we just.
So we're getting close to the end, but I did, and I'll get another quick question. I did want to say something I wanted to ask along those lines, though, is throughout Florida, given the states that we do have to win, and you can sort of rattle the ones off that you think, what do you think then which issues become most important in terms of getting, those people the Democratic side?
Well, I think one of the most important issues, and it's going to be the economy. So I need to go, and I think it's a little bit less true if it's a movement candidate, but I think that for many people it still comes down to their own pocketbook. And one of the things that I do worry about, even with a movement candidate, or that I worry about with Bernie Sanders, is that as much as people want to believe they care about others and they want to do what's right for others, they also have to care about themselves. And I worry a little, and I'm going to spend weeks getting over it if Bernie is the nominee, but that they are going to worry about their own pocketbook, and they're going to worry about when he says he's going to tax billionaires, do they just hear my taxes are going to go up, even though they know they're not a billionaire? Do they worry about the impact of Bernie Sanders on the economy, and what that means for their just economic future? And so I do worry about that quite a bit. And then I don't think most people really are honestly single issue candidates, and it's about what they believe is the best thing for themselves and their family.
So, did you still want to?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I'm just interested in your opinions on what are those very narrow demographics, populations that are going to decide this election, like vis-a-vis the Electoral College. Is it moderate Republicans who need another kind of a candidate to get them? Is it those 90,000 voters in Michigan who for some reason didn't vote for that? Like, who are those narrow sects of the population, and what are they looking for?
I want to hear if you agree with this, but I kind of narrowed down my whole thought process to just 3 states: Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. I mean, that's how to get those 3 states is all I ever think about. And Pennsylvania is an example I brought up earlier, which, from everything I have read, really what we're hinging on is fracking and where the unions will go. Because everything I've seen and heard, if it's someone who's opposed to fracking, the unions will tell their members to either sit out or vote for Trump. And this speaks to Ruth's pocketbook issue. So I'm not sure that there's a one. I mean, we always read about how the suburban voter and the soccer mom and to get all of them. I don't know if it plays out that way in every state. We've seen states.
No, and I think part of it is it's very hard to say right now because we don't know who the nominee is going to be. And I think, as we've been talking about, there's a very different strategy if it's a movement candidate versus it's a moderate candidate. And let's just go with the assumption that it's Bernie Sanders, because for now, because with a moderate, it's almost a little easier. But if it's a movement candidate, if it's Bernie Sanders, I don't know, because he actually has. The challenge with Bernie Sanders is he's very well known and divisive. So many people actually don't like him. But once he becomes the nominee and people start thinking about him more, we'll have to see who comes around to him. We'll have to see what the unions do. Who does he pick for his vice president? What does he start saying as he goes out? So, I wouldn't want to say, I don't know, I'm not polling in those states, and I think there's a huge difference now between just looking at the people who are his core versus the, what will all of Biden's people do? I don't know yet, right? I want to believe many of them are strong Democrats and will vote for the Democrat, but I just don't think they have.
So that is a good segue to a comment I wanted to make, which is, or a statement. Regardless of who the nominee is, there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done because there are going to be some people who are really happy on the Democratic side and other people who are, how could this happen? So it's really then incumbent on all of us and everyone we know that is, calls himself a Democrat or doesn't like this president to truly engage. The plan is to have this Wallenberg give people opportunities to do that. Whether it's the weekend in Nevada and phone banking and that type of thing, that's the type of thing we're looking forward to doing. Hopefully, with everybody in this room participating, we saw the debate tonight. It can't, hopefully the screaming at each other is not going to continue for that much longer. But it might, it might until it gets better, and it will get better with all of us involved. So again, please let us know how to keep in contact with all of you. Join me in a loud, thank you. I know that you have many, many demands on your time, and there are people who pay really good money to get your advice and input, and you did this, out of your dedication to the cause. So thank you for doing that, both of you. And thank all of you for coming out on Tuesday night in February. Thank you, Manny.
Thank you, Manny.